do an interactive exploration of the use of restrictive practice using a reflective lens. And I'm going to follow a case study of a young man who's in his 20s, and I'll tell you a little bit more about him now in a minute. But firstly, what I'm going to say is I'm going to use a tool that we developed which looks at 5 areas for reflection that really help us to do a kind of a deep dive into, I mean, I suppose it's a tool you could use for anything that might be challenging. I mean, there's a lot of challenging and complex scenarios within the provision of support to people with disabilities. So this is a great tool that you could use for anything that would be complex. In this case, we're going to use it to look at restraint and restriction that is used for this young man, Pat. We're going to reflect and try and identify maybe more innovative methods to try and eliminate and or reduce the use of restriction. And if I can tell you, in this case, we were actually successfully able to eliminate it, which was really good. So the interactive workshop will allow you, and I'm going to be asking you lots of questions, to explore a case study of an individual whose behaviour is a risk to life. The interactive workshop will take participants on an experiential journey to challenge you to consider approaches and practices by offering challenging questions, which will make you consider your own values, belief and cultural responsiveness. It will engage you in critical thinking that will allow you to practice in a manner that will reduce or eliminate the use of restrictive practice, particularly for diverse client groups such as those with complex intellectual disabilities, mental health difficulties, or those who may have experienced trauma. Now I need to be sure, what are you seeing? I think there's probably a better way for me to share. No, okay. Okay, so this challenging situation involves Pat, obviously not his real name, and this, by the way, is not his real picture either. We have access to resources, so that's an actor who sold his image, fair play to him, for use. So Pat is a young man. He has Down syndrome, autism. He has a severe intellectual disability, and he has complex behaviour. He's also non-verbal and has an anxiety disorder. And I think when we look at maybe sometimes when restriction and restraint is used, that may be a typical profile of somebody who tends to challenge services quite a bit and consequently can end up in scenarios where restraint and restriction is used. He's in his mid to late 20s. He spends most of his time on a swing, and that is because the staff are not able to engage him into, I guess, what they would consider maybe more meaningful activities that would allow him to grow, to develop skills, etc. So they find it very, very hard to distract him away from the swing. He lives in a house with 4 other service users who all have similar kind of conditions. He has a rigid routine in place. There's 8 staff on duty during the day and 2 at night. And Pat has a history of physical aggression towards staff, which has led to staff actually being apprehensive about working with them. And that creates a challenging work environment also. So staff, in order to try and support them, so I suppose the real problem here is that not only does Pat have all of the complexities we've talked about, he also has a swallowing difficulty. And at the time when we did the work with Pat, it was also believed he had an eating disorder as well. So one of the most challenging situations or scenarios that arose when providing support to Pat is that if he gained access to bread, he would put his hand into the loaf and he would pull out as much as he could, and he would then put that to his mouth and try and eat it as quickly as possible. And obviously that arose a number of concerns for staff, particularly that he could choke on that, given that he had swallowing difficulty as well. And that was why, number one, they used environmental restraint to keep all edible items locked away. Now, they decided on, at the time, to lock the kitchen as opposed to locking a cupboard, because if he couldn't gain access to bread, he would gain access to a freezer. If he couldn't gain access to the freezer, it was the fridge. And the other reason why they locked the kitchen was because if he did actually get into the kitchen and got access to, let's say, for example, the freezer or the fridge or anything else that was not locked, it would be far more difficult to get him out of that space. And that would have led to potentially very, very unsafe situation for staff and also for him as well in that situation. So that was the kind of thinking. If we lock the door, then at least he can't get into this smaller space where it might make it very, very difficult to intervene safely. Then, of course, if he did actually gain access to it, the staff then were using physical. You see, when the door was locked, Pat was in a hypervigilant state. So he constantly kept his eye on the door. Now, that resulted in staff being incredibly vigilant as well. But I think anybody who knows, who's worked in these kind of areas will know that there's very often a high staff turnover as well. So you've got new staff coming in who may not be as vigilant, they're not as aware of the dangers perhaps, and consequently that would mean that they may walk out of a kitchen and leave the door open without thinking about it. And Pat never ever stopped thinking about it. So anytime the door was left open, Pat would actually make a run for the door and try and get in. So for scenarios like that, the staff would intervene physically to try and prevent him from gaining access to the bread or any other food item that might cause difficulty. Or if he got further and actually got access to it, they would intervene to try and stop him from putting it into his mouth. And sometimes to try and get it out of his mouth. So guys, if anybody wants to use the chat box there to ask any questions, please by all means do. But I'm going to ask you some questions now, because we said this was an interactive, explorative journey. So I guess the first thing I'd like you to try and do is identify the key issues here that you would be concerned about. And then the second thing is, if you were to advise this staff group, is there other strategies that you would recommend for them or other interventions that you would consider might have been better for them to use? So if you use your chat boxes there, and I can only assume that that's exactly what you are doing right now, so I'm going to give you a minute to do that. Okay, Helen is saying, perhaps exploring other activities. Now, how do I view that? Okay, great. Yeah, so Helen has said perhaps exploring other activities rather than just the swing that he might enjoy. Yeah, absolutely. Now, I'll be honest with you, they found it very, very difficult to do that. Exploring likes and interests, as Peter, yeah, they would be good things to try as well. Involved dietitian, could Pat have bread in a more suitable form? Yeah, I think that's actually really good, Clodagh. A way of doing things, looking at that. Sensory diet, I would 100% agree with you there. Yeah. Salt involvement, yeah. Involved the dietitian, could Pat have bread in a more suitable form, right? Sensory diet, yeah. Schedule timetable when he can access the kitchen, very good. Apologies, I just joined in late and consequently missed the intro, but looking forward, okay. Keeping similar or smaller separately packed portions of bread, very good. Varying diet with food he might enjoy. Staff to sit with him, yeah. Having visuals for the day so he is distracted and has a plan for the day. Yeah, Emma wants to know, can he have access to some food which would be okay for him to swallow? Very good. Rita said, how can they do these restrictions with other residents in the house? He really is a person who needs to manage in his own environment. What is seeking? Yeah, what is he seeking from the bread? Very good. Yeah, Rita, absolutely. Yeah, other residents also restricted from the kitchen. That is absolutely correct, Cormac. Yeah. Is it because he's always been restricted from bread? What was he able to have? What if he was able to have his bread when he wanted, with staff support and observation? Yeah. Could he be given access to own cupboard in the kitchen? Yeah, another apology there. That's all right. And is it just bread causing the risk? And actually, no, it's not just bread. Yeah, it wasn't just bread. Yeah, there were other things as well. Assisted decision making, very good. Thank you, Caroline. How are you doing? Maximising his choice, very good. And another Caroline then. Education around the risks and suitable alternatives, yeah. And each resident could have their own press or cupboard, yeah. Eating disorder exploration, very good, yeah. Great. Okay, so they are definitely the key issues. And I think just drawing on some of those, delighted to see that other people recognise there was other people in the house who also have been restricted in this way, possibly without any justification whatsoever. As well, people are bringing in the Assisted Decision Making Act. Absolutely, he has every right to eat, albeit that right now the way he's doing it is quite dangerous. But I think people are starting to recognise that maybe the way that they were managing it was only increasing the risk of danger. He also has an anxiety disorder. So the fact that they have restricted him in this way has probably only increased his anxiety, leading to an absolutely more dangerous situation. The other thing there, people have noted, about introducing a kind of a daily schedule or a routine that might be more engaging for him. My big concern there was that the staff had not actually developed that kind of a rapport with him. And that also is a huge concern as well, because anybody who works in this area will know there are three things that are vitally important to supporting someone like this, and that is relationship, relationship, relationship. I kind of made that up. I think that's kind of cute, like the best place to buy a house is location, location, location. But yeah, that's really important. Somebody said about a life vision, absolutely, like where is his life going? This is all about micromanaging him with no clear direction about what his future is going to have as well. Okay, great. So the purpose of a reflective lens, it has 5 quadrants, that's how we say it. It looks at things like knowledge and partnership. So what sort of enhanced knowledge would staff supporting someone like Pat require? And also, how do they engage in a way of supporting him that's much more about partnership? much more about listening to him, hearing him, recognising what he really needs and wants, etc. as well. The next thing then is engaging in values and ethical driven practices. And of course, a lot of you have already identified some of those as issues, so we're going to delve a little bit more deeper into that. Also, the use of experiential learning to reflect on practice. And I did this workshop at a conference there earlier in the year. And one of the things that I was shocked about was when I asked the group about experiential learning, they tapped very much into the idea of, role playing and things like that. And what shocked me was that they all said that the role play that they engaged in was to keep themselves upskilled on restraint. And I'm like, oh my God. In other words, you're not role playing essential things like how to listen, how to hear, how to connect, how to engage with somebody in a more meaningful way, but you're practicing how to restrain them. And that's a huge worry. And that's what was going on in this scenario as well before we got involved. We're going to look as well at some theories and methods that also could enhance the provision of support there to Pat, and also to look at the kind of skill sets that staff really need, because it's also very, very possible that the kind of training they've received is not sufficient enough to support somebody with the kind of complexities that Pat has as well. So there's our little reflective lens. So in terms of knowledge and partnership, well, firstly, people need to know the legislative framework. They need to know organisational policy. They need to know HICWA requirements. And they also need to have good knowledge on what is autism, what is Down syndrome, what does it mean to be non-verbal, and how do people who are non-verbal, how do they actually communicate, and how to communicate with them. They need to know what an anxiety disorder is and why somebody may be in a hypervigilant state all the time, etc., and how to support that person in a much calmer way and create an environment that's much calmer. They also need to know about autism and how somebody can literally retreat into their autistic world when they do not feel safe where they are. So I think there was a lot of knowledge gaps there from the team that were supporting this man. Also, they need to learn how to work in partnership with him, how to listen, how to hear him, how to hear his voice, how to hear his actions, and how to hear his inactions. So what is this behaviour actually telling us? And where do we draw, or where are they drawing their knowledge from? Which source is more influential? And again, when we kind of looked at that with the group of staff, they were drawing their knowledge from each other and each other's experiences. And I guess I felt that even though they were getting supervision didn't infiltrate their thinking, and it didn't help them to look differently at it. There was this kind of a sense as well, there was a lot of firefighting going on. I mean, staff can be hurt as well in these situations. Physically, they can be left, if they are using restraint as well. It's a very complex area for staff. There's a lot of complexities around it. It may go completely against their grain. They may act out of fear. And there was a lot of apprehension and fear there. Pat had a reputation, everyone knew it. People often heard about him even before they got there, so he had a reputation within that area as well. So there a lot of things there that made it very complex for them. So I guess the kind of things that maybe weren't considered was building a rapport and trust, so that they could start to make connections with them, and even knowing how to do that when somebody is quite disengaged and I suppose not necessarily looking to engage with others either. So it meant that staff would have needed a lot of skills to basically tease him out of that kind of entrenched world he was in, as well. Also, I guess there was nobody maybe sharing or exploring the world from his point of view. How did he see things? And I would think that he would see things very, very differently. Some of you have alluded to that in your comments there. You know, he may have saw, well, it's my right to have food whenever I want to, which it absolutely is. And he had gotten to the point where he was not concerned about his swallowing difficulty either, which made it a very dangerous situation too. Also, did the staff appreciate that they were supporting somebody who had a severe intellectual disability and what that might have meant? And in talking to them, I thought they thought he was an awful lot more intelligent than he was. They seemed to think that there was a strategicness around his behaviour. Do you know, that he knew? They would say things like, he knows who the weak staff are, he knows where the vulnerability is in the staff group, and that's the way the staff were looking at it. Instead of recognising this guy has a severe intellectual disability, there's no plot, there is no plan. Whatever occurs, occurs in the moment, and it's driven out of need. Other things were, I guess they had a risk management plan, but it wasn't very tailored to Pat. It wasn't driven by an understanding of who Pat was either. And they did not have a restraint reduction plan in place. And a restraint reduction plan could have helped them to start thinking about, how do we navigate our way out of using this practice routinely? Like, while it may be acceptable in the moment, there may be absolutely nothing else you could do. And in actual fact, it may even be the wrong thing to not do it because of the risk to life. But there was no strategic thinking about, how do we get out of this as a method of support. So that's the knowledge aspect of it, and the partnership. But here's also the legal implications that may not have been necessarily thought through. Informed consent, criminal and civil law is also very important. You know, the use of restriction is not in itself unlawful. However, or you might say it the other way around, it is unlawful. However, there may be legal defences for the use of it. But it was almost like, we have a defence and therefore we can use it, as opposed to, we have a defence and there are 4 principles of law that we need to follow every single time we consider its usage. And by using those 4 principles of law, that could have defined their risk assessments and their ongoing reduction of restraint strategies as well, had they have used them correctly. There's issues, of course, with documentation and reporting. There are protection of rights issues. There is avoiding negligence, which is an issue as well. There are risks of litigation. If Pat was hurt in one of these situations as well, or a staff member was, it could give rise to litigation as well. There are HICWA compliance issues here as well. And then there's, of course, serious breaches of Pat's human rights there as well. So there's lots of issues there that, from a legal point of view, that need to be considered. So in summary, the legal implications of use and restraint in healthcare settings emphasises the importance of following established protocols, obtaining proper consent, documenting procedures accurately, and ensuring that restraint practices align with individual rights and legal standards. And my sense was that what happened was people looked at this issue as a health and safety issue, which it absolutely is. And they use that to drive their interventions without considering that his human rights were an equal partner and should have been an equal partner in their thinking about how do we provide support in an ongoing way to Pat, where we can help him to move away from this urgency and need and restriction, etc. Okay, there's an important question there that Pat is answering, or sorry, Cormac is asking, what if consent for restrictive practice has not been forthcoming? I think the very nature of restraint and restriction means you're never going to get consent for it. I mean, it doesn't make sense, even if you get somebody to sit down in a room today and say, yeah, you can restrain me when I go to do X, Y, and Z, or you can restrict me when I go to do X, Y, and Z. Well, having that on a piece of paper last week has absolutely no relevance to whether or not the person wants to be restrained right now when they want to get something. So I'm not sure that consent is realistic to obtain, or if it should be the goal, because the sheer nature of what you're restricting them for or restraining them for has to tell you you don't have their consent. Now, the best you could probably get is that they might agree with you that if they do something that puts them at risk in a moment, that it might be the least restrictive way that you could do that, and they would agree to that. But they're still not giving you consent to restrict them, because why are you restricting them if they are consenting? Why are you restraining them if they're consenting to being stopped to do something? So it's kind of a complex one, Cormac, and I'm not sure how much legal footing you have with saying that somebody agreed to consent. I think it's different if you're using something, let's say, like a cot side in a bed where somebody is worried about falling out themselves. Now, there's obviously much safer ways that should be done, but I'm just thinking that might be something that's different. They're saying, well, I don't want to fall out of the bed, so would you mind putting a cot side up? But even at that, you would consider other things that would stop them from falling out and hurting themselves before you go down that road. But the real issue becomes when they want it removed. Because now you don't have their consent. So even with something that's planned like that, the moment they decide they want to get out of their bed and they can't because that's there, then you now have a serious situation, which now goes against the law. So I don't know if that helps, Cormac, does it? Okay, so I was saying there we need to have these two pillars. One is health and safety, but the other is human rights. They need to compete equally. Absolutely have to compete equally. And that's a good test for anybody who's putting together any kind of a strategy. You need to ask yourself, are we as concerned about their human rights as we are about their safety? So the knowledge piece then, and which I think is really important, is what do staff know about the conditions of the people that they're supporting? Like, for example, what did they know about a severe intellectual disability in Pat's case? And what did they know about it? How did they know that's different than a moderate intellectual disability, for example? And do they know what that is as well? So, for example, do they know how much language they understand, or whether they do understand language or not, etc. Do they know how they take in information, how they pick up on cues, how they pick up on, and if so, are the staff using that strategically to communicate with Pat, etc. as well? So that's often a concern, and I know when I do when we're teaching PETMA, that was one of the key pillars of PETMA, is explaining all of that. And very often, and I see there's quite a few people in the group that has done my PETMA training, and you will know one of the first questions I ask is, what is an intellectual disability? And if you're in my class, you will know that I'm often met with silence at the end of that when I've asked that question. People are not really that sure of exactly what it is. So that's a real area that needs to be addressed. Also, autism, what is it? A lot of the time people don't know what autism is either. But most importantly, they don't always understand either how people can retreat either into their own world as a consequence of maybe not feeling engaged or safe in certain situations as well. Down syndrome definitely adds another layer to this. There's no doubt about it. A lot of physical health complications, as well. The swallowing difficulty is huge. Non-verbal. Again, do people know how to engage with somebody who is non-verbal? Do they know all the techniques that somebody who's non-verbal that they use? And do they know how to use those themselves as a means of communicating as well? Again, do they know what an anxiety disorder is? And do they know that that's why Pat was probably hypervigilant as well? We'll get back to whether he was getting enough to eat or not as well. Also, do they understand the formula that results in distressful behaviour? And there is a very clear formula, and it is stressors that are both immediate and that are also underlining. There is the behaviour and what it tells us. There are the triggers, the moment that puts the person in a situation where they're likely to or could potentially use distressful behaviour. But of course that could be resolved very easily if people understand it, so it doesn't always mean an escalation. But generally what causes the escalation is the function. And do the staff, have they had training and those kind of things as well, where they understand that, and most importantly they understand the maintaining factors. In other words, why does somebody need to use distressful, risky behaviour in order to get their needs met? So that there is a formula that really needs to be understood so that they can start to work some of the strategies that you have outlined there as well. So doing a whole deep dive, a whole functional assessment there as well is key to understanding Pat. And again, when we're doing our PETMA training, that's what we're always looking for, is trying to figure out those 5 things, that formula. We believe somebody only engages in distressful behaviour when they're in a situation they do not otherwise have the skills or resources to deal with. And the more likely they are to repeat that behaviour, it is because it works for them. And that is a formula that takes time to figure out, and that's actually what our 4-day PETMA, by the way, does, is try to figure that out. Okay, so I guess the next thing is, like, what does this tell us about Pat? And yeah, maybe just if you want to engage here, just if you have any questions or you want to comment on that question as well, what does it tell us about Pat? Jane is saying, what you said about understanding hypervigilance is so important. Being restrained on a regular basis is likely to disrupt his nervous system more, and maybe even lead to traumatic responses. 100%, absolutely. So they created a formula that resulted in him being hypervigilant all the time. And of course, he's going to react then very quickly. So that's why they had the sudden, quick because he's already in that escalated state. Yeah, that's very true, Jane. I'm kind of just stopping now for a moment, just even if it just allows you to take in what we've done so far, or also if you wanted to comment as well, please, by all means. That engagement is good. Cormac, you never told me whether I answered your question or not. So I'm not sure if there's yeah, Claude is saying Pat has no control over his own choices or decisions. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And the way the staff looked at it is that he did control. He decided to disengage, and he decided to spend his day on the swing, which is not a real choice. You know, it's not like he sat down and I've got a great idea. I know how I'll spend the rest of my life. Yeah. Okay. Guys, I'm going to start moving on just in case nobody else is saying anything. But if you are, then we can pause and take a look at the comments as they come in. Okay, Sandra has come in. Yeah, he was not offered anything else. To be honest with you, Sandra, they did, but they didn't know how to do that, right? So you can't really say to him, do you want to get off the swing and do something else, you know? And that was the kind of strategies they were using with him. But he has a severe intellectual disability. They were offering him choices in ways that really didn't, I suppose, engage him in any meaningful way. And that was the problem. The problem was they hadn't made the connection with them. And that's why offering him choices meant nothing. He didn't trust. Remember, he's hypervigilant. So he doesn't feel safe in his own space. And he doesn't feel connected to the people who are providing him with the support. And that's the biggest barrier right now to him making choices. It's the not trusting. At least when he's on the swing, nobody's bothering him. You know, it's predictable. He knows what's happening when he's on the swing, etc. But when the staff start coming to him, because he doesn't trust them, he doesn't want them, he's no tolerance for them, he pushes them away, etc. as well. Monica's saying to make choices, you need to have opportunities. Yeah, absolutely. You see, we're all engaged there, right? Okay, great. I need to go back a bit there now and see what were we. Yeah, so Monica's saying, yeah, to make choices, you need to have opportunities to make choices. Exactly. And Helen says, yeah, that's where the rapport would have come in to support the choice. Yeah, exactly. Does he have goals? I would say, Pauline, he does. Well, okay, let me put it another way. There's goals written down for him. But again, if you can't make that connection with them, they're not going to be meaningful. And they're not going to start with where Pat is at. How did the team record times where relationship engagement worked? You see, that's really important. Well done, Paul, and that would have been a good strategy for them to start looking at that. Valerie says staff needed to learn to communicate. Yeah, there are so many ways to do this if you're engaged in your role. Correct. Absolutely, Valerie. Yeah. Marion says choices need to be offered in a way that are suitable to him. Needs to be offered things based on likes, interests, motivation. Yeah, absolutely. And I think even doing a deeper dive into his life and maybe finding out from past as well what sort of things he did like doing, that he got some enjoyment out of, that he connected with as well. Yeah, Sinead is saying though, Pat needs to feel safe and secure, 100%. And until that has been achieved, I don't think anything else is going to be achieved. Joan quite rightly is pointing out Pat is in fight or flight mode. which is not a good time for him to be learning new things or making choices or making decisions, because he's in survival mode. He's in fight or flight mode. He's deeply affected by the experience not only of previous trauma but current. He's living in a traumatic environment. Yeah. Yeah, the building of the relationship is key, and that's going to take time. It's going to take a whole team approach, and to support Pat and the team will be key in the process. Yeah, absolutely. And I think as well, given staff time as well, sometimes to recognise, and the safe space to recognise that their strategies may have been harmful to the development of a relationship with Pat as well. Staff are going to start feeling guilty. They're going to, they're going to need time to explore that. It's going to take time for them to let go maybe as well, because they will have believed they were so right, they had to do it. So they have to come down. And I think staff also become hypervigilant in environments like that as well. And they need time to come down. They need a safe space as well to start recognising we need to do things differently. We need to start engaging with Pat in very, very different ways as well. Then Cormac is saying coordinated MDT informed team approach is needed. Yes, and how do we connect with Pat? That is true, Cormac. And I also think as well, sometimes when we get the multidisciplinary team involved, they can be incredibly helpful. They can write reports that really shine a clear understanding maybe on the broader needs of the service user. But sometimes they're written in ways that the staff don't know how to use that information in their connection with the service user. I don't know if you know what I mean, but you get a psychology report that tells us he has a severe intellectual disability, etc. They don't necessarily know how to translate that into, when I'm with Pat in this moment, right now, this second, when I'm with Pat, what does that mean I need to be doing? Or how do I spend this time with Pat that acknowledges his severe intellectual disability? That is, how do I engage with him in ways that are useful to Pat because he has a severe intellectual disability? And that's, I think, where things can be difficult. Also, speech and language therapy reports. I have seen absolutely fantastic ones. They will even tell you what sort of concepts somebody is likely to understand, how they're taking in information, how they know things are happening, because these are the things that often confuse staff. They think someone's really intelligent because they know when it's dinner time, or they know when, when you come into the room, automatically, to get up for a shower or whatever. So they don't realise actually they're being cued for those things. And a good speech and language therapy report will start to tell that. But I don't think it's enough that it lands in a file and read that when you get a chance. And that's sometimes what happens. As opposed to, we need to sit down with the speech and language therapist. We need to go through this really, really slowly and think about, how does this mean we need to communicate now with Pat? How do we use this to connect with Pat? To build up a rapport with Pat? To offer Pat choices, to etc. Yeah. We're on the same page there, Cormac, absolutely. Pauline then is going back to, what impact are these restrictions having on the other residents? Oh my God, thank you, absolutely. And often not thought about enough, that they are exposed to the trauma of that they're witnessing it. How do they get supported afterwards? It also probably means they're living in a hypervigilant environment as well. And I wonder, does that make them withdraw? Does that make them not come forward? And yeah, I would say it's pretty tragic for them. Paul is saying, if Pat is soothing himself during times on the swing, yeah, very good, Paul. That's exactly, I'd say, what he's doing, bringing himself to a calmer place. Would this not be a good time to engage and build interaction with Pat? Yeah. And I think sometimes what the staff would have said about that is he gets really annoyed and agitated when they come near him. And I would think, yeah, because he's escaping. And you're intruding on his place of safety and his escape. So, yeah, I think what staff need to do is they need to recognise in the moment, in action, whether or not Pat is wanting that engagement or not, right? So they need to not, I've got a plan, I'm going to go out now and I'm going to ask him, does he want to do da da da, or I'm going to try and spend time with him now. So they've predetermined what they think the outcome of their intervention is going to be, as opposed to suggesting, I'm going to move very carefully with this intervention. I'm going to pick up the earliest indicator from Pat that this intervention is not okay right now, and I'm going to step back from it. And that's how you build up trust. When Pat starts to recognise, here's someone who's listening to me. Here's somebody who's picking me up early, who recognises early. I don't have to get really annoyed. I don't have to start walloping out and kicking out to say, go away. They actually are hearing it in the earliest indicator that this isn't working. I don't want this now. And then if they step back from that, now they've started to build a block, just one block, that allows the potential for trust now to get created between the staff and between Pat. And then the next time they do exactly the same thing. And bit by bit, you know, and when I'm doing this, and I often use this as a method of engaging with people like Pat, I often start off with standing quite away, but knowing that I'm visible to them, and I literally stretch my hand out. That's it. And I don't move and I don't speak, because remember, Pat has a severe intellectual disability. So probably the likelihood is when you use language, you're going to overwhelm him. So, okay, guys, you're really engaged in this. This is great. Pat has such little control in his life that these behaviours are being repeated, plus. Huge amount of MDT work needed with Pat as the central person. Yeah, very good. Okay, from a starting point, would a trauma-informed approach be used? Of course it would, Paul, absolutely. That's, I guess, what I'm suggesting there is, and that's how you build if somebody has experienced trauma. Of course, they're going to see everyone as a potential threat in a relationship, because possibly because of the trauma they've experienced, it's been difficult for them to let people in, because they know people may not be trustworthy. And that's a bad starting point when you're trying to build a connection with somebody, if they have a belief that other people are not trustworthy. And then that can become a self-fulfilling prophecy. Okay, guys, look, there's some fabulous advice there as well. Look, as you know, this has been videoed, so all of those will be there if people do want to, you know, look back through the video later as well. Okay, so learning to listen really is what we're talking about. We're talking about building rapport and developing trust. We're talking about understanding the world from Pat's perspective. We're talking about using that knowledge to inform our risk management plans. And sometimes what happens is there's a disconnect between therapeutic intervention and safety intervention. And that's why we developed PETMA, by the way. It's because we believe the two of those should be consistent. They should work together, not have one type of strategy for one thing and another type of strategy for another. Develop and look at, of course, developing a restraint reduction plan. how do we back ourselves out of this as a strategy as well. Empower decision making for Pat as well. Create a supportive, non-judgmental environment as well. Provide education and resources. Collaborate with multidisciplinary team. Regularly review and adjust, and this is where debriefing really needs to happen. And a lot of the time debriefing, well, sometimes it doesn't happen. Sometimes it does happen, but maybe the people who are facilitating it are not trained in how to facilitate it. And I think if you have a model of debriefing, then you can take people through a very structured journey that allows you to seriously examine how things have escalated, what influenced the escalation, the possible things that influenced the de-escalation, and it can really help people along that journey. It can also look at contributory factors, both from the staff's contributory factors, Pat's contributory factors, the environmental contributory factors, the resource contributory factors as well. So it can give you a really, really good formula for examining it. It can also help to look at the impact it's had on Pat, on the other people who've observed or witnessed it, and also the staff who were involved in it as well. So having a good way of engaging. And guys, I'm going to mention we have put together a series of 6 online restraint reduction modules that are built around this particular scenario, by the way, as well. So there are a series from 1 to 6. 1 to 3 is for frontline staff, and we'll send you out some details if you'd like afterwards about them, but they're affordable, they're easy for you to gain access to as well, and it brings everybody through all of this. So by adopting a partnership approach, staff can empower individuals to actively participate in managing risk to life behaviours as well, and while providing a compassionate and effective support tailored to the unique needs and circumstances of anybody in this situation, but we're thinking about Pat. Okay guys, we'll move on now and we'll start to look at maybe the ethics and values as well that need to be considered here. So values, of course, are things that we should value, that we value as part of the support we provide. A lot of you have already touched on them. You've looked at things like freedom, like he's every right to be free from restriction and to move freely around his own home as well. Autonomy, he has a right to make his own choices. And right now, he is making choices. Unfortunately, though, some of those choices are not safe. But equality, as in an equal partner, his view and his voice needs to be heard, and choice. And then ethics are things like human rights, also looking at the Nurses' Code of Conduct, which has a very strong ethical ethos there. CORU as well have also put together their code of conduct, which also really strongly emphasises values in practice and ethics as well. Least restrictive practice as well is a cornerstone of good ethics. But very often that's not thought out well enough. You know, sometimes people think a least restrictive alternative is after the first and second thing don't work, as opposed to maybe a rigorous evaluation of all of the methods that have been tried. And then cultural sensitivity as well. So in terms of ethical considerations, it's autonomy and dignity. And I have serious friggin' trouble with these words. Beneficent and maleficent. And it's the acts of doing good and doing harm, I suppose, that they really considered Like, what harm does our restraint or does our interventions actually create, both for Pat, the other people around, and also for the staff involved as well. The staff are often very, very traumatised by being engaged in, and I'm thinking, if they're traumatised and they can get up and walk away from it, what about the people who live with it, who witness it, and the people who experience it? Okay, so the next one then is experiential learning, and maybe people would like to just maybe throw in some ways that you think experiential learning could assist Pat in this situation, assist the staff team, the other service users, maybe in this scenario or indeed in any other scenario as well. So if you want to use the chat box there. Yeah, like that, Teresa, just being with him. Yeah, no expectation, no, just being. Yeah. Teresa then has said, I work in mental health and these type of just being with interactions help a lot more. All right, okay. Yeah, you're absolutely right. Yeah. Just being with somebody in the moment, no expectation, no demands, no questions, no nothing. Yeah. Okay, I'm presuming, guys, you are working in the background diligently there, thinking about how experiential learning could be a good tool to use as well in thinking about the use of restrictive practice. So Peter is saying it's important to have protected time for reflective practice. Yeah, as sometimes staff shortages, etc., can impact this. Yeah, that is very true, Peter. Yeah. It's trying to figure it out, isn't it? And I think the less you reflect, the shorter your staff's your staff shortages are going to become. So there's a kind of a vicious cycle there as well. If staff are not supported to engage in the thinking through of these very complex situations and been listened to and heard about ways that we could have avoided this use of restriction and restraint, then I think they're going to tire in these environments very quickly, and burnout is going to happen too. Yeah. Monica says it could be a good tool as well to explore alternative ways other than restrictions. Yeah, absolutely. Team meetings are very important for reflection. Exactly, Pauline. Keith then has said, I think it's very easy to become reactionary to the behaviour, and then after experiencing it, we have a tendency to concentrate on the negative and skip the learning from the very difficult. And I think that's a really good point, Keith, and I think that's why you need the facilitator of those discussions to be trained in how to facilitate those discussions, because otherwise all you may get is the negativity from staff, as well. Maeve is saying, often try to change a person where it is often good to leave outside of the interaction and actively listen both to what is said but also what is not said in demur, etc. I think you mean the staff. Do you, Maeve? And if you do, I agree with you, because I think sometimes longer maybe serving members of staff have a view that maybe newer members of staff don't get it, they don't understand, they're not here long enough, whereas older staff may also be reacting to previous trauma. We may have a vicious cycle going on where they've, in their experience, this has happened, and if you don't get in quick enough, that'll happen. And yeah. Jane is saying, I've used empathy mapping before, which encourages you to think about what someone might be thinking, doing, feeling, saying. not necessarily with words, in situations, i.e. be in someone else's shoes, and that can lead to new thinking. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that can be, somebody alluded there and said sometimes, when staff get together afterwards, it can be quite negative. And I think that is because there's nobody leading it in the way you've just outlined, Jane. There's nobody taking the staff through a whole journey. And I also think sometimes people try to do too much in debriefing. They don't realise actually that staff need support before they go into debriefing, so that they can emotionally disconnect from the experience as well and start to think rationally. So they're two very, very different things. And I think sometimes there's an attempt to do it all in one. And that's where it can become very problematic, because staff aren't ready to engage in a more rationalised approach where they can think more strategically. So if Caroline then, yeah, Sinead is saying, yeah, they need to step into his world, absolutely. But if we ignore staff care, they won't be able to do that. You've got to give them the space, whether it's the space to vent, to say how they feel about it, etc., before they're ready to walk in someone else's shoes. Because right now they're too busy in their own shoes and what's going on for them about everything. And until they've been given that opportunity to work through that, they won't be able to come in and yeah. Okay, Caroline then is saying reflective practice can be in action, on action, or draw upon critically within an integrated model of reflective practice, which should include, for example, the individual's voice. Yeah, very important. Other stakeholders' views, absolutely. And I would hope as well that that would include the other service users. Theory and evidence-based practice, values, safety, legislation and theory. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think as well, it's important as well that we understand all the different types of support and the differences between them as well, because staff also need individual supervision. And that's to enhance their skills and their ability to be able to provide a more intuitive style of support to Pat, to learn how to make those connections. And where there's an expectation that that's what they're trying to achieve, that they're expected to try and do that, that they demonstrate evidence of trying to do that, that they explore when it goes right and they explore when it goes wrong as well. Maeve is saying team meetings discussion on human rights. Yeah, that can also be very helpful, Maeve. Sandra again says staff need support as they are living the fear of this individual dying on their shift. Well, absolutely well done, Sandra. I think when we look at these, you've got to understand what drives everybody in it. And that's what's driving the staff. Not on my watch. If he dies, it's not going to be on my shift. Yeah. Paul says there can be a tendency to focus on the complexity of challenges, but this can overlook possibilities of positive risk taken. Yeah, and that's where you really need to balance your safety and your human rights. Absolutely. So we can start looking at this differently. Cormac is saying staff need to be supported to take the steps and to be reassured that they will not seen negatively for how they supported Pat in the past. Yeah. And yeah, absolutely. And I think people need to talk about how complex this is and not blame them for it. You know, they are absolutely scared out of their wits that he will choke on this bread. Yeah. Staff then can be supported to make the changes required. Yeah, absolutely. Good leadership of the team during this period is key. Yeah, totally. Totally, says Sandra. Or somebody is saying totally, Sandra. Yeah, well done. And somebody there is inviting you to this today. Yeah, I'm sorry. Okay. Okay, guys, lots going on there. Really good stuff. Okay. So experiential learning To prevent the use of restraint and restriction involves immersive training methods focused on equipping individuals with the skills and strategies needed to effectively manage complex behaviour, without resorting to physical intervention. This approach emphasises proactive techniques, communication strategies and de-escalation methods to promote a safe and supportive environment. Participants engage in hands-on activities, simulations, role plays to practice and reinforce non-restraint approaches such as active listening, problem solving and conflict resolution. Through experiential learning, individuals develop the confidence, empathy and critical thinking skills necessary to prevent and mitigate crisis situations while upholding the dignity and autonomy of the person being supported. The focus on experiential learning, I mean, we have to consider some of the negative things that can happen to staff as well. Some of them may end up physically injured in the midst of this as well. So could Pat, not just from the choking, but even from holding him in this kind of crisis-driven attempt to restrain him as well, that could. We need to understand the psychological distress, how it's isolating Pat more and more and more and making him more and more hypervigilant and experiencing the effect of the trauma. That psychological distress is going to be with staff, it's going to be with the other service users as well, and also managers. You know, it's difficult for managers as well, knowing that their staff are involved in these kind of complex situations as well. And sometimes staff look to managers for answers that the managers simply don't have either. Social isolation, definitely that can occur for Pat, but it can also occur for the others. It can occur for staff too, because staff may disagree on strategies. They may think that, you know what, if so-and-so never said that or didn't try and stop such and such, this restraint would never have been required. You know, so if they voice that, then they can be seen as not being a team player, not being a team member, you know, so it can have like polarising effects as well within staff team. A loss of autonomy for Pat. I mean, he has no power, no control in any of this. Neither do the other service users witnessing it. And some staff may say they don't feel they have either, that they have to go along with whatever has been decided. It can lead to a deterioration of skills for Pat. I mean, look at Pat. Pat has withdrawn so much. The only thing he'll engage in is the swing. But then also some of the staff would say that it has caused a deterioration in their skills. They have lost their ability to be creative. They've lost their ability to make connections. They feel that they have a loss of professional capability. It damages their own confidence. And when we do our PETMA course as well, we always do a review with staff to see what are the effects of supporting people with verbal distressful behaviour or physical distressful behaviour. And invariably, everybody that we do PETMA with has experienced verbal distressful behaviour. Not everyone has experienced physical, but even with verbal, people tick the boxes that say it creates anxiety for them. They have difficulty sleeping sometimes. They have felt a loss of their own professional capability. They lack in confidence and they're frightened going to work. And I'm not sure that there's enough space given to look at those very, very harmful effects, because these are the same staff that are feeling this, that are somehow expected to make these rich connections with somebody so complex, when they're actually frightened of the person as well, or frightened of what can happen. So we also need to look at the environmental impact on staff as well as the service user, because that's why sometimes people come up with great strategies and they don't work. And why don't they work? Because you don't have a staff group that feels equipped to connect with those interventions. And so we can't underestimate the value of identifying staff's need for support as well. All of that, of course, can lead to increased agitation and aggression. But also there's a guy in the UK, and he's put together a kind of a psychological theory on the use of restraint. And basically he identifies that the initial concerns with a service user is dealt with restraint. But the consequences of using the restraint puts people into a cycle of using it. Because you have a service user who's traumatised by it, and you have a staff group who's traumatised by it. They see each other as opponents, whether they intend to or not, but at that particular time, it can start to have a kind of an oppositional, impact on their psyche. They feel resentment, they can feel hurt physically, emotionally. I could do my job better if he wasn't here. You start to get that he's in the wrong place, he shouldn't be here, she shouldn't be here, that's not what we're here to do. And that effect then creates the cycle that drives the use of restraint as well. So I guess what I'm saying is, if we were going to explore it, we would oversimplify it if we think the only thing that needs exploring is the relationship between the service user and the staff. Whereas what I would suggest is we need to look at the broader parameters of that service as well, and look at the relationship that the organisation has with the staff, how they connect with the staff, how they role model with the staff, the kind of way they expect them to behave with the service user. They need to be listened to, they need to be heard, they needed to be connected with as well. And they need to say how tough this is, how scared I am. And they need time to heal as well, so that they are emotionally ready to intervene in ways that are good for Pat. So by considering these components in the use of restraint, healthcare providers and social care providers can promote ethical, person-centred care that prioritises the safety, well-being and rights of the individual receiving the service, but also of the other people who are receiving the service, the other service users, and they should be involved in debriefing as well as the resident themselves, and also the staff. Okay, guys. I hope you're enjoying this, are you? But you've stayed. Well, a lot of people have stayed, so it must be doing something right. Can I just maybe suggest to you, if you wouldn't mind, you probably know we are really trying to promote PETMA. A lot of people don't know it, they haven't heard of it either. So what we're trying to do is just ask people just to give us maybe a Google review as well on this, so that we can just promote it. Really, we're not asking necessarily for people to buy it, although yes, that is something we would love as well. I'm just trying to find a link here. Drafts, where are we? Oh, come on, I had all this ready. There. Yeah, apparently we're learning about social media here, and we're trying to infiltrate the market with our PETMA model. And this is all the kind of stuff that we do with PETMA. So anything will help us, anything from, putting a review on Google. We also have, we're going to follow up this with our 6-module restrictive practice online training. So we will send you out information on that. The other thing is, people may like access to the notes, and we also have a certificate for you. as well. So we're going to send you another email, which is going to come from learninglms@constantlearning.com. May go into your spam folder, but if you log into that, you will get your certificate. The Google review is there. There'll be information about PETMA for in-house trainer, train the trainer, or a consultant train the trainer. And also there will be access to the restrictive practices, and we're given a 20% discount on that for the next week as well. So there's a lot going on there. So guys, if you wouldn't mind, I just wanted to say that because I know people have let me know that they need to go a bit earlier. So I'm happy to carry on now, but just to say, if you wouldn't mind. Oh, thanks, Teresa. Okay, just. Okay, so theories and methods then. So this is important that we are driven by, I suppose, various different theories and methods, and that gives structure, shape, and also it gives a more holistic way of viewing the service users and the supports they require, etc. So there's several different theories here that we would look at. Trauma-informed care, of course, is that whole understanding of the trauma that not only do people often come to our services with, but the trauma they experience while they're in our services. So being very mindful of that is really important as well. Crisis intervention. And I think a lot of places are using models like CPI and MAPA and different things like that, and they are crisis models. But the thing about it is they don't connect up with the proactive stuff as well, which again, by the way, is what we have done with PETMA. Is we have looked at a model that starts really connecting with a real understanding with the person, understanding the complexities associated with their with who they are. And we've driven that all the way right through to the understanding of the escalation cycle, how to bring people to a calmer place. And we use the same kind of strategies all the way through that we've talked about here. We've also developed some very simple physical techniques that allow you to stay engaged with someone, even if they have made attempts to hit you, etc. But you can stay there and still be safe. And continue to bring the person to a calmer place. So it doesn't mean that they have to be restrained by 2, 3 or 4 people, that the one person themselves can stay there and be safe. If there's a need for more, we add that on, but it's not part of our 2-day programme. It connects very much with positive behaviour support as well, person-centred approaches. Other theories are things like restorative practices as well, communication skills training, cultural competence, ethical decision making. But we also really think that people need far more training in relation to having a severe intellectual disability or a moderate intellectual disability, non-verbal communication, Down syndrome, and understanding all of that as well. And actually we've put together, we have an online campus as well, which I've sent you a link to in the invite for this. And in that we've put together bundles for those different type of training. On their own, I think they're very useful, but doing them as part of a staff group could make them far richer and far more empowering as well. So by integrating theories and methods into staff training and practice, organisations can promote a holistic and person-centred approach to providing support to people who have complex behaviour and minimising the use of restrictive practices as well. Staff training and competence, and we've probably covered some of that, but also, and by the way, these are all included in our own PETMA training, but understanding legal and ethical considerations, risk assessment, and also decision making at the time. And that's really important. Like when somebody when restraint is being decided upon, it needs to have a leader. It needs to have somebody who's initiating it and ensuring that it is absolutely the right and only response available to them right now at this moment. And that person's leadership role needs to continue through the whole of the intervention. So I was asked a while back there, would I do our PETMA training with a group of staff who had been trained in another, I'll just say another provider that provided restraint training. So we can provide that as well. So at the beginning of it, I just said to them, guys, I tell you what, show me what you've already learned, and then we'll work from there when it came to the physical part. So one person sat in a chair with 2 chairs on either side, or a chair on either side of them. Staff went out to the side. They looked at each other. They mouthed 1, 2, 3, and then they both ran at the person and got into a physical hold straight away. I went, whoa, 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 guys, get back. What are you doing? And they said, well, we're restraining a person. And I said, but why? That person is sitting there and doing nothing. Have you not even thought about that? And they said, no, that's how we're taught. We're taught how to do it, like to just run at somebody and go in. Then I said, okay, carry on. And I was like, oh my God, what are you going to do next? And then they walked them around the room and kept walking them around the room. So then I just said to them, I said, guys, would you mind telling me, what are you doing? And they said, well, we're just holding on to the person. And I said, yeah, but what's the plan? Where are you going? What is it? Have you lost sight of what it was you intervened initially for? So I have to say, I am worried about the way in which people sometimes are trained to do physical restraint as well, because the lack of leadership, the lack of thinking strategically about, like, you may be justified, all right, to have intervened when somebody has bread nearly to their mouth and they could choke on it, but what's the plan when you intervene? And that's something that I think absolutely, whether people think that PETMA is right for you, but I would absolutely urge you that whatever one you're doing, you need to really examine what are people being taught in classrooms around the use of physical restraint. Because if that thinking component is not there, then what you're going to get is people are going to restrain someone. And I know we often go in and do reviews where restraint is used, and I give the same feedback over and over again. There's no thought. You're hanging on to the person, waiting for them to calm down. You've lost justification. Remember, you went in for, if it was the right thing to do, you went in for a reason. But people have lost sight of that. So I think those kind of things, in terms of staff training, staff competence, you know, how is somebody's competence assessed for them to use restriction or restraint, particularly physical restraint, because it's so personal, and, you know, what are they competent at? Because I know assessments can be that they know how to hold somebody, but are they competent in knowing when to let go? Are they competent in knowing how to monitor the use of it while they're in action? Are they competent at maybe having a plan of what this restraint is about? Like, once we've achieved, or at what point is the objective of it achieved? And at what point then do we need to be maybe looking to do something else? And are those kind of skills monitored in the use of restriction or restraint? Okay, guys, so look, at that kind of brings us, and there's our safety cycle. So we look at things like ensuring services have good policies that guide all of this, right through to how to make connections with people, how to engage them, etc., how to develop meaningful relationships, right through to the use of physical restraint, and what is the role of people when they do it, and how do you debrief afterwards, how do you provide support, etc. So they're the pillars of a safe cycle. A good policy that guides and directs everything. identifying service users with the most complex behaviour and having all the supports made available to them so that you can put together a really meaningful person-centred support plan that is built around connecting and meaning in their day. Good incident reporting, which by the way our 6 modules have all of this in it. Good incident reporting, how to report it, how to look at contributory factors, how to review those incidences, how to monitor them as well, because monitoring can tell you an awful lot as well that you may not pick up in other ways. Debriefing, another key. Staff support, and both immediate staff support after an incident, but also recognising when staff need additional support and supervision, etc. So guys, that has brought us to the end of this, and I'm